Hi, good evening in London. Good afternoon if you are tuning in from the United States. My name's Kelly Sidley. I'm the head of the photographs department at Bonhams Auctions based out of New York. And it's my pleasure to join this Photo London program today with artist Jefferson Hayman. He is based in the New York area as well and has, to me, a fascinating practice of both photography and a real attention to the framing elements that go into each and every one of his work. With that, I'm going to let Jefferson begin and start us off with discussing how he came to be an artist, where his interest in photography comes from, and particularly where the frame started to play such a role.
Well, hello, Kelly and everyone. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. So let's see, the superhero origin story. I grew up in Pennsylvania and was always drawing, painting. Then eventually went to art school, and I have a degree in drawing. So I became a self-taught photographer much later, but while in art school, saw a job listing for the local frame shop. And I took it, and next thing you know, that developed into a skill. After graduating from school, I moved to New York City, and the Chelsea flea markets, the famous Chelsea flea markets, had antique picture frames for $5, which at the time was very affordable to me, still is now. So I started getting the practice or incorporating the practice of buying a vintage frame first. And then as photography came into my being, let's say, I would take the frame sizes with me to the darkroom. This is pre-digital days, and then create a print specifically for that frame. All of these different factors, my awareness of the frame, my skill as a framer, the availability of antique frames, just kind of merged into one. And it is something that has a lot of offerings, let's say. It enables my print, which is a piece that I could reproduce 10,000 times if I wanted. It brings it into the unique object category. The vintage frames lends a sense of humanity, scale, color, all the things that a normal frame would, but it has a history to it now. So all of these things combined into my practice to have me arrive where I am right now.
Fabulous. So when you first started working in the frame shop, I'm sure much of that was the production of new frames for everything from family photographs to fine art paintings. Were there particular materials or styles that you had more of an interest in than others? I'm trying to figure out if there was kind of some of those kind of earlier points that have contributed to your kind of current aesthetic, which to me has this kind of pointing back to the past and kind of things that have a patina to them oftentimes.
Yeah, I mean, like if I'm looking at 100 antique frames and thinking about which ones I could use on my work, 98% just get nixed. I have a very specific look for my frames, a very particular aesthetic. Some of the golds and silvers and the kind of warm wooden tones work. So that's kind of like what I collect. It references certain parts of history, which is another vehicle that the frame can lend itself. So like, like the wooden frames would reference a circa 1900 or 1890s feeling image. Silver frames, gold frames also have certain historical context. So yeah, does that answer the question, or did I get sidetracked?
It does. I know when you had moved to New York, you worked with a framer that worked with a lot of historical frames, like some really significant and oftentimes I imagine very elaborate creations, which I do think I see a little bit of that crop up here.
Absolutely, yeah. So that was with Eli Wilner and Company in New York City, and I was the gallery director there. And it was a doctoral degree for me in learning framing influences. Also, as the director, I learned how to run and assist in running a gallery, which is another skill set that I brought with me after I left the 9-to-5 world and became a full-time artist. So yeah, my days at Wilner, I mean, we framed, you name it, for the Met. We did work for MoMA, all of the private collectors and collections, a lot of the auction houses as well. Yeah, it was really an amazing time.
Awesome. So maybe we'll start with our PowerPoint presentation so we can actually see some of your work and talk about both individual pieces, and then we'll get into the installation aesthetic that is so central to your creations. All right, so this is the image that some of you may have seen. We're using it as the sort of central promo image for this talk. Jefferson, walk us through both the image itself, the frame, how the two come together to make this particular piece.
So we vacation on Nantucket every year. I love the history of that island. This particular image is the weather vane on top of Town Hall in Nantucket. And if you catch it just right, the roof becomes the sea, and the sky is just the sky. I love how it's very minimal. To me, this is kind of like a short story without an ending. There's a journey going on, but the viewer has to kind of fill in the rest. In terms of how it relates to the frame is a contemporary tramp art piece. I did not make this one. A friend of mine in Texas did.
Can you just to stop you, can you, for those who might not be familiar with the term tramp art, explain what that means?
Oh, sure. So tramp art, there are some people will argue about this origin story, but as history goes, during the Great Depression, there was prevalence of a lot of things. One was men out of work, and those men often carried pocket knives, and those men often smoked cigars. Cigars were made from very thin mahogany pieces, and as the rumor goes, any trash can in any urban or suburban area would be filled with these mahogany pieces. So free wood, guys with a lot of time and a penknife. And again, whether that's true or not, who knows? I'm sure it has some truth in it, but they were whittling away to pass the time, and they would create boxes, desks, you name it. One of the easiest things, I think, was picture frames, and it would just, each piece was hand notched and then glued and nailed in a layering device. And despite its simplicity, just masterpieces have been created over the years in this technique. So this piece is honoring that old tradition. It's based upon like a union of me and the maker's designs, and then it's sent to me unfinished as raw wood. And I decide to tone it based upon what photograph will eventually go in it. So not to get down too much in the weeds, but that little black line that kind of encircles the image is extremely important. If it kind of tells you where the print ends. If that wasn't there, if you can visually imagine it as that warm wood tone, I think it wouldn't be as effective. I think that the warm tones of the print would bleed into the image and you'd lose a little something. That line says print stops here, frame starts here. To accentuate certain areas like the star patterns in the corners, I tone them in black, and then the whole thing gets kind of uniformly coated in a garnet toned shellac.
So yeah, I find this one particularly fascinating because it really, to me, expands the boundaries of contributions, if you will, in your work, right? The found imagery of the on Nantucket, of the weather vane, the tramp art inspiration for the frame. I think you were telling me before that it's actually fabricated by a gentleman in Texas.
Yes.
And then, your attention to the toning of the frame, and then bringing all those, and then the printing of the image, which I know you go through a lot of test prints to finalize size and format. Can come back to that in a little bit. But in one sense, it's a very collaborative process. You are obviously the ultimate director of all of that, and have a lot of choices to make here. Let's go to the next slide. Aha. Tell us about this one.
Okay, so this one is called Ace of Hearts. The actual subject itself is a vintage travel deck of playing cards from Hungary that I bought online. They're very small, I would say 2 inches height, and they are just so delicate and damaged over the years, very, very fragile. But to me, this is such a potent symbol. To me, this refers to childhood nostalgia, playing cards, the single, I'm sorry, maybe the singularity type image is something that I really respond to. It's direct. There's nothing else in this image. It's about one thing, this playing card. Then, of course, it represents love, all those things combined, basically. And then it's placed into this very worn white painted frame. And this, the frame and the presentation here helps to make this kind of like, almost like a Robert Ryman painting, if you would think about it like that. It's white on white. There's warm tones coming through, and of course that singular red area, but it's all about lightness and light tones.
So I know sometimes you produce one-off unique pieces, but is it fair to say more often than not you do an edition of an image?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kelly. I have been editioning my work since the very beginning, usually in editions of 25. But right now I'm going through a lot of like internal struggle over, aren't these really just unique objects? I mean, I'll never be able to find another frame like this. And if I did, it won't be in this size. So if I want to check that box and say the frame is super integral and a part of my work, then I have to check the other box that says these are no longer in the editions.
Well, that was one of the fascinating things about your work to me when I first started looking at it, is this very different idea of edition for you, because you are not making 25 prints of the exact same size and putting them in 25 of the same colored mat and the same frame. Each of them is unique in and of themselves. So I love that sort of mixture of not being one or the other, personally.
Well, thank you.
Of course. So just to clarify, so this was an old frame that you repurposed for this particular playing card.
Correct. Yes, this was purchased as is and has not been touched or resized in any way.
How has your sourcing changed over the years for finding older vintage frames?
That's another great question. Oddly enough, you'd think it'd be harder and harder to get, but I think that I have just gotten more and more sources. So I search every day. I go to a standard set of vintage shops that know me. Sometimes they set them aside for me. And then I have a small army of pickers out there that will be in a shop and they will send me something, and they know my style. They know what I buy. So we go through the checklist. Is it damaged? Is it straight? How's the color? How's the tone? And they know what I want so well that I trust them, even though we're doing it over text or email.
Okay, that makes sense, because I am always amazed at how productive you are in your studio. And I'm like, how is he out there finding these things and like doubling himself,
Sure.
as he's printing and fabricating?
But you bring up another good point. To do what I do, my practice demands that I have a constant inventory of frames. Because if I want something, I can't stop and go out and look for it. So at any given time, I have 400 to 500 in the studio, and those can be resized. I can break them apart and make them smaller. So I have a wood shop in the studio where I work on the frames as well.
Do you have you ever come across a frame, or maybe many frames, that you just couldn't part with? You could not send them out into the world. You love that frame so much.
Yeah. I have I was in the Parisian flea markets in the north of Paris, and I found a Degas frame.
Wow.
Yeah, and so I purchased it, and it's in my studio now. So I don't think I'll ever sell that one.
No, that one needs to stay at home.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next image. Great. So the very different feel here. So tell us about this one.
Okay, so this one is titled "And So We Decided Upon London." This image always reminds me of The Great Gatsby. And to link into that age, silver was very, very popular, even though this is a 1870s frame. The fact that it's silver always reminds me of the 1920s. So that's where this pairing comes from. And again, in a way, this too is very white on white. The image is a warm tone, pale image, and the silver just basically reflects light. So to me, like I would also refer to this in like the white on white category.
Great. Let's go forward one more slide. Okay, this is perfect because it gets at such a differentiation of scale across your work.
Yeah, and oddly, that's the large version back there. We didn't plan this. So this is a great way to illustrate how the sizes have moved within the edition. So yeah, this is one of my miniatures prints, and it's actually so small that it can't hold glass. The glass would push this further back into the frame, which would cause a shadow to cover up half the image. So then what I do in terms of that is I skip the glass process, and I put numerous layers of sprayed gelatin and a archival varnish on this that doesn't require glass. To me, this references both 17th century still life tradition as a subject, again, paired with my kind of solitary single type image. And then the frame is a circa 1900 vintage fumed oak that I resized in the studio. You know, it's fun in this day and age of digital murals to create something that you can quite literally put in your pocket.
Well, you know, 30 years ago, the idea of making a big photograph, you know, something 60 by 80 inches, let's say, that still felt pretty novel. And now as technology has expanded and made that, in my opinion, a more reachable physical option for photographers and artists, you know, I see a lot of very big photographs in the world, and I oftentimes ask myself, why? Like, does this image really work best at this huge scale, or could it function as well or better in a smaller, maybe easel size, or even a very, you know, intimate handheld size thing? And I'm personally finding myself very attracted to small, little, intimate, almost talisman-like objects. So these I just adore.
Well, thank you. Talisman is actually a term that I use often in the titling process.
Perfect. When you were doing this one, did you have the goal of kind of making the tiniest photograph that you possibly could, or was this just sort of what happened in the process, if you will?
On this one, the frame came first.
Okay.
I'm a little bit of a pack rat, and I can't throw anything away, anything that has potential to be used in the studio. So this was the largest frame that I could make from a cutoff section for another project. So I made it, I hang these, when I do something like this, the frame will get hung on my studio wall empty. And I really have to mentally process my thousands of images as to what could possibly work within this tiny little window opening.
It sounds like sometimes the frame comes first and then you figure out the appropriate image. Does it ever work in the opposite? Where okay,
yeah.
So it's very fluid.
It works in a variety of ways. They all inform each other.
Got it. Great. Well, I'm so glad to see this little guy here. Let's go forward one more. Aha, what is this?
Okay, this is a black Polaroid that I created accidentally. I don't know what I did incorrect, something with the light setting. But then, you know, when you look at it and you hold this thing in your hand, it almost becomes a Rothko painting, you know, with those weird blurry edges. And I've often said the most important thing in this image are those two shadows on the bottom and the right-hand side. It's the thing that lends a trompe-l'oeil effect and really turns this into the most basic of a minimal object. The shadow tells you that it has 3 dimensions. So this is a wonderful union of a kind of vintage looking photograph paired with something that is minimal and very, very contemporary, which is the welded aluminum picture frame. I'm not a welder yet. I'd love to learn this trade. So I have these created for me. And I really like the elegance of this. I also like the very minimal nature of this as a union between image and frame.
Yeah, it works really well as a pairing. So just so we all completely understand what we're seeing here, you had taken a Polaroid and then you've rephotographed that Polaroid.
Correct. Yes.
So you can make multiple prints of that. Do you always keep the actual dimensions of the Polaroid within the print, or does the image get expanded? I'm trying to figure out if you're kind of maintaining the scale of the object in the real world.
No, that's a very good question. So another reason why I have these singular images with a lot of space around it is because I need that. I have to crop in left to right, top to bottom sometimes, while still maintaining the overall personality of the image. So on this particular one, it's surprisingly difficult to crop this print of a black Polaroid. I usually like to have some bottom weight there. As you can see, there's more space on the bottom than on the sides and the top. Yeah, just seeing this makes me want to make.
Is this an image where you always use a kind of very kind of stark metal frame, or have you presented this in other ways too?
Yeah, I think I put this in a white frame once, a handmade white frame, and I like that, but it's just not beating this. So ever since I started using these aluminum frames, I haven't gone back. So, but these frames have different design marks. They're really a one of a kind object as well.
Well, so since this one is so self-referential to photography and even the history of the medium, and I've seen other works that you've done of cameras, for instance.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that little subsection within your imagery, this sort of photo?
Sure. I mean, I just love the concept of meta. The philosophy, not the company, of course.
Yes.
And you know, it's all about process. God, you're making me think of David Bowie. One time had creative block, so he wrote a song about having creative block. And that's just like it's just incredible, you know. So like I love photographing cameras. I love photographing things around the studio that reference the history or the process or the meta of what I do as a living.
Well, I would say anybody who is at least, let's call it 40 years old or older, probably has some memory of that massive seismic shift in the history of photography when kind of analog sort of started to phase out and digital became, you know, the prevalent means of making a photograph. One of my favorite things are photographers who are still either referring to those older processes or even in some cases physically using those materials. Think of somebody like Alison Rossiter who takes old photo paper, right? And develops them out. You know, so from a kind of nerdy photo point of view, I think this is fabulous.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Let's go to the next slide. What's going on here?
Okay, so this is kind of a departure for me, image-wise. This is my city series, and I just imagine flying over a city and having the buildings being reduced to purely geometric forms. And I just have fun. I just create these, move around. I create an imaginary city, and then I print them on coffee toned paper. Which has, again, that's a unique paper. No two pages are going to look alike. And on this one, this is like a modernist frame, painted white. I would assume it's from 1930s to 50s, anywhere within there. I actually have it right here. And just to give you a sense of scale.
Nice.
So to me, the frame came first. I made the print for this. And it's relatively new. I think I made it like a month ago or so. I love it. This is one of my personal favorites. I have like a love and hate thing going on with everything I create. This one I really give high marks to.
Well, I'm very happy for you to mention that sort of idea of the aerial view looking down on a city that, I was thinking more of like building blocks of a sort of almost
Okay, okay.
not childish, but like very basic idea of structure and the vertical rise of building. But I love that idea of looking down.
In fact, I think I should mention this now because as we go through all the images to everyone who's following along, you're going to see a lot of different styles in here. So
Mhm.
obviously this is non-representational. And this all stems from my ADHD, which was, a real crutch to me early on in my creative and younger years. But now I consider it my superpower.
Mhm.
Like if I see something like whatever, a Charles Sheeler painting or drawing that is like pure modernism, I have to go make something to
Mm.
honor that. And it doesn't have to be an exact copy of it. I almost use it as a cathartic moment. I create something. I can't stop thinking about a Sheeler. I create it. Okay, next. Now what are we doing? Oh, Dutch 17th century still lives. Great. So I don't work within a box. I just work however what I want to work. And I basically use the camera to document my life and obsessions.
Well, I love the fluidity in that, both of subject matter, style, and even in your framing choices. It's completely eclectic from, again, just what we've seen so far, the sort of thin metal frame of the Polaroid to the much more Baroque, for lack of a better word, of the tramp art frame we started with. Let's go ahead one more slide. This is one of my personal favorites. My version is hanging behind me in my office at home. And this is actually kind of fun because if you see it on the wall where my finger's pointing, it has a very different frame. It's a silver gilt frame versus this one. Tell us what's going on here.
Okay, so I love I love photographing clouds. It's a series that I've been photographing and documenting ever since I picked up a camera. They're just these fleeting moments, and no two are the same, and it'll be there 1 second and then a different shape or gone the next. So this is actually a great example compared to what you have on the wall there, Kelly. That the one in your collection is smaller and surrounded by a silver frame, which again just has a feel of like lightness. This one is surrounded by an ebonized Dutch-inspired frame, which if you can surround something with black, you're going to make that seem more vibrant and more saturated as well, which is the kind of the aesthetic reasons behind the choice here on this black one. Plus, as a design element, those little rounded areas, which are called ripple elements, to me, they kind of mimic clouds a little bit. Which is part of the choice going into this one.
Maybe this is a good time. You're talking about your interest in photographing clouds. I've given a little bit of thought over the years to other artists, both painters and photographers alike, or even within other mediums, who have also had similar interests in clouds. Certainly Alfred Stieglitz comes to mind with his equivalents that he was making. We've done a little bit of a discussion amongst ourselves previously about the history of framing photography. If anybody out there in our audience has any good points of view or reference articles or books on photos and framing, I would always welcome those suggestions. To my knowledge, there hasn't really been a history of the framing of photography done. But we were talking about, where does the sort of very minimalist, quiet kind of box frame design that we see so much in sort of mid 20th century going forward, and even in the majority of contemporary photography that's being produced today, where did that style come from? Alfred Stieglitz, when he was framing his own work and that of other artists for his 291 gallery, going back to the teens and beyond, was using very simple white painted metal frames, usually with a good bit of the mat or the mount showing. I think that's one touch point for maybe helping to understand where the simple box frame we see so much now comes from. Do you have any thoughts or ideas you'd add to that, Jefferson?
Not really. It's a big question mark for me as well.
Yeah.
And one that really does deserve some research. Yeah, I mean, it has to go back to 291, Steichen's gallery and his influence. But
Well, we were talking earlier about O'Keeffe and Stieglitz and there, because O'Keeffe was also very specific in how she framed, and kind of chicken or egg there of who is influencing who, perhaps. But definitely another artist who the frame was central to how she wanted to present her work.
you know, Kelly, you're just making me think that doesn't the Met have a Steichen flat iron in some very really wide, extravagant frame, or am I confusing that?
No, I don't think you are. I think they have, I believe the Met owns 3 Steichen flat irons, because the one that was sold at auction, I think this past May, for an extraordinary sum, I believe, was the 4th and final known print
Okay.
of that image. Somebody out there, please correct me if I'm wrong on those numbers. But I do believe you're right. At least one of them is in quite an elaborate frame, at least compared to how we typically think of photo frames now.
Yeah.
It'd be great fun if anybody from the Mets out there would love to see all 3 of them hanging at once. That's always one of the most illustrative and greatest learning experiences I can take away when I'm seeing an exhibition, is, you know, the variations in prints or techniques,
Great.
or, you know, how something is presented in different ways. Okay, let's go forward another slide. The human form.
Yes. Okay, so this one is called Crying Girl for obvious reasons. The teardrop was applied with a pencil, and it's surprising how difficult it was to apply this and then step back and try to photograph it before it either got absorbed by the skin or dripped off. But anyway, so this is referencing drawing rather than painting, which was my first true love, drawing. So this has a very graphic kind of ghostly and floating type feel. This is basically, an image of a model that I hired. I applied that. If you would print this 40 by 60, you would see a self-portrait in her eye. But I've never done that with this one. This is a great example of the power of a dark or ebonized frame around a single solitary image like this. It's like how can you not see everything in that image? I'm a big believer in the psychology of looking, and the human brain is a problem-solving machine. So when it looks at something that's mostly black, within a microsecond, it says, "Okay, got it. What's next? Oh, what's this over here? Oh, an eye, you know, like let's just focus on that." So that's the psychology of using something wide and nearly completely black with just, you know, a little bit of warm accents there. That is my reasoning behind the frame on an object like this.
I also think it lends a real gravitas to this.
It does. It
I mean,
does.
not suggesting this at all, but just imagine if this were in like a little box lime green frame. To me,
Right.
it would have a completely different feel and sensibility to it.
Great. This brings like a unified melancholy to everything. If it was a gold frame, a totally different thing. Like you said, a green frame from the 50s or 60s, totally different feel.
Yeah. All right, let's go forward another one. And this is a new image to me, so I would love to hear.
Oh, okay. So this piece is called Dürerzeit, which means, I believe, in the time of Dürer or in the era of Dürer. You're going to hear me reference painters and painting a lot. I'm a big art history nut. So I'm a big fan of Albert Dürer, who found beauty in the commonplace. And this was in one of his, I believe it was watercolor on vellum. I don't know the exact date, although I want to say 1519 for some weird reason. So it's just Albrecht painting a weed, but you know, and this has haunted me since art school, this image. And so I was walking down the sidewalk one day and I saw this. I was like, oh my God, that looks like Dürer. So I came back with my tripods and backdrops and everything and photographed this. And to reference the Northern European history involved. With Durer, I chose a Dutch inspired frame, ebonized surface again, with a very minimal sort of design element, but it's mostly just undulating curves and flat areas. And again, I think this is a pretty successful union of frame and image. If you can imagine this frame being very, very complicated, it would do nothing but fight with this image, which in itself is a very complicated image. It may look like it's kind of sparse, but that's just in reference to the top 2/3.
So how did you decide on the actual image print size for this? I'm trying to play that game and imagine it smaller, bigger. Like, how did you land here? The whole object to me looks like maybe like 12 by 10 inches, maybe a little
Yeah,
larger.
I would say that's safe. Yeah. So again, the size is a reference to Dürer again.
Okay.
And the whole scale of art up until, I mean, what, the 1940s, art was very intimate, always was. Take a top 10 list of the most well-known or best paintings, and they're all going to be so small, including this one. This was a study for Dürer, so I don't think it was probably anything bigger than what you'd see here.
Thank you. Let's go forward another one. Aha. I think this is a great moment to talk about, maybe I can call it the singularity of your images. You're oftentimes presenting one specific thing. And I almost think of them as sort of adult flashcards where you see the card, you see the glass, you see the lemon, but clearly there's so much packed into that image, whether it's references to art history or feelings or philosophies or cultural, social history. I'd love to hear more from you on that sort of singularity of image that you present.
Sure. Well, I love that term, adult flashcards. It's just amazing. It's perfect for my work, actually. And it really links into what I'm doing and what you hinted at there. I'm not telling a story, I'm suggesting a story. And what it's going to mean for one viewer is going to mean something else for somebody. And I love that. I love how this is open to interpretation. And yeah, I mean, to me, I before I left the 9-to-5 world to become a full-time artist, I was the director of Eli Wilner and Company. I had to wear a suit every day, and I hated it. So this series on dress shirts, I started right around that time when I said I'm not dressing up anymore. I'm documenting that chapter of my life and moving on. Interesting enough, to make sure that there was no linkage to anything written word or something that could cement a personal narrative to the viewer, I had to go in and remove the text from the label. As you see there at the top, it was, I forget the brand name, and apologies to that brand, but I just took out the text. And this is placed again in a Dutch frame. And the whole history, every culture, of course, has its own cultural influences. So the Dutch 17th century frames and art movements were inspired by religion and the Calvinists, who didn't use a lot of gold or silver. They used ebonized woods, tortoise shells, keeping in mind that the 17th century Holland was like a miniature America. They had extensive trade routes, a ton of money, and a decent military. And they were the top guys for a while. And this is something that would be, if you ever go to the Met, let's reference the Met again, and the Dutch painting, you'll see the Vermeers, some of the Rembrandts, and a lot of his circle and contemporaries are presented in frames similar to this.
Well, I love you bringing up the 17th century Dutch aspects of this. I think of those amazing ruffled collars that you'd see in the Frans Hals painting.
Yeah,
that is not totally dissimilar from this. This is, in one sense, the 20th or 21st century version of that.
so, yeah, there you go. That's brilliant. I never thought about that either, but now I can't unsee it. It's such a link.
Or I know the little I've only seen it in a little version. So maybe it's done larger as well, of your shoe, your brogue. Is it part of the same series as this? You sort of,
Oh, yeah, the wingtip shoes,
yeah,
yes.
the wingtip shoes. Yes.
Yes, yeah,
Oh, all right. Okay. I'm just trying to be cognizant of time and I want to make
yeah,
sure we
no
get
worries.
to
If you
some
want me
more.
to go any faster, just, let me
Oh,
know.
no, this is great. Okay, so this is a different image compared to some of the others we've seen in that there's a landscape element, there's much more of a foreground, middle ground, background. How does this fit into your work? Body of work, I should say.
Okay, this is a great example to discuss briefly upon the image. Again, I'm talking about like obsessions and everything, and I was going through a phase here where I was really admiring the 8x10 view cameras and their depth of field, meaning that the further you get away from the subject, the more blur would occur. So this is the Hudson River, and I was walking along the riverfront. I saw these 3 trees and said, okay, here's my repetition, almost like dominoes going back into space. The first one will be full of detail, the second one less, and the third and the background completely blurred out. So this is referencing 1850s, 60s, 70s photography and the processes and the effects of those prints. Now, this is encased in something totally different than the last slides that we looked at. This is a contemporary plywood frame that I handmade in the studio. It has a slight angle on the edge. And again, there's that black line that I often incorporate into my work, which kind of very subtly tells you this is where the print ends and the frame begins. It's a very wide frame. As you can see, it can stand up by itself, which is a very fun presentation thing. I like to think of my works not being limited to a wall, but could also be on a desk, a shelf, etc. Just one note, not to get into the weeds, but plywood is made using a version of formaldehyde as a glue, which is very toxic to photographs. I found this out the hard way. If you use plywood frames, your photographs will start to yellow just within weeks sometimes.
Wow.
So what I do to combat that is there is a varnish called B72 acryloid varnish. And once you apply it to something, it is not coming off. It's a wonderful barrier. So anytime I use, well, basically any frame at all, not just plywood, but I usually double or triple the coats when using plywood. And that will prevent any sort of toxins in the frame or the wood to migrate over to the photograph.
Wow. Such good information. I did not know that at all. Thank you for sharing
Sure.
that. It's not, just thinking about references, I had looked at a client's August Zonder photograph of the 3 farmers a couple of days ago. And I don't know, very different works, but there's something about this that feels like the tree version of that photograph.
Oh, interesting. Wonderful.
All right, let's keep going because I want to get to some of these installation shots. And there's a detail of the work.
Yeah.
Did you try this one with some kind of more vintage frames as well before you decided, or maybe you framed it both, you have framed it both ways?
I don't think so. I've done this twice. I've made 2 prints of this image. Both of them had plywood frames.
But I mean, this feels spot on to me. I'm just curious.
Excuse me. Also the tones too.
Yeah.
That blonde wood of the plywood lends itself so well with the sepia tones of the print.
Yeah. Okay, let's keep going. We're going to get to an installation shot soon. I know it. All right. I'm going to leave it to you if you want to discuss this one or keep going. Your call.
Sure. I'll just go through really quickly. Star Wars was a pivotal moment in my creative career. As I mentioned earlier, I have ADHD. As soon as Star Wars came out, I didn't give a damn about long division. All I wanted to do is draw all the Star Wars creatures. So that has kept with me over the years. This one is in a kind of typical 19th century portrait frame, gilded and broken, just like the subject. And it's inverted to just be a little play on the nature of the subject. Inverting an image was an early American colonial insult. If someone in the family had done something wrong, their portrait would be hung upside down to invert their negativity, which is the entire reason behind this. And this one, as we mentioned earlier, Kelly, this one is called Good Fortune Talisman. So it's referencing something that the owner would possess to bring it, whatever, in this case, good luck, good fortune.
Oh my gosh, I love that piece of information and history about the turning of the portrait upside down. I'm gonna have a new system of is mommy happy with my daughter going forward? Not really. Okay, let's go forward. But thank you for that. That's again fascinating. Next slide. This I feel like drawing playing a big part of this one.
Absolutely. It looks so much like a drawing, and this is coming from a draftsman. The subject is one of the sculptures in the Musée d'Orsay, and it is basically I just erased the rest of the photograph in Photoshop to create this effect. It's extremely warm toned. It is then placed in a. It doesn't look like a warm tone matte, but that's just because of the lighting. Pardon that. And then it is also placed in a circa 1870s warm tone gilded frame. Now, if you don't mind, I'm just going to talk a little bit about this whole pairing. The print is warm toned, the matte is warm toned, and as I said, the frame is warm toned. This to me is like a unified palette, much like a painter would, but I'm using 3 different objects: print, matte, frame. And also to get back into the frame design and how it could either complement or take away from the image. This is a very complicated pattern that's going on here. I don't know if you can see in the details, but it's a vine pattern. And it's very, very busy. So I needed to separate this from especially an image as simple as this, thus the warm white matte. And the overall size is 21 by 17 on this. And it's relatively new. It was just finished last week.
I'm glad you brought up the use of the matte here, because that is an element that you don't always use in the framing of your photos. So
Right.
it really makes good sense in this case.
Yeah, I skip the matte a lot. Like here's a little piece that I have right here. So this is like, framed as a painting, no matte. And I do that often.
Making these miniatures, are these relatively new for you? The
The miniatures?
Not, or have you been doing them a while?
Yeah, the miniatures have always been present.
Always.
I love the intimacy of that size and scale.
Let's go forward one more slide. Okay, so there you can really see the frame.
Right. Yeah, that's better.
Wow. Wow, that's exquisite.
Thank you.
Okay, one more forward. Oh, okay, so I can't get enough of still lifes of fruit. To me, I could look at this all day. And I do love this one in particular because you just get like a little sort of sliver of the orange.
Yeah, I'll do, if okay with you, Kelly, I'll do the same thing. I'll talk a little bit about the image, then the frame and how they unite. So again, this is referencing Dutch 17th century still life painting, but then how it was then taken in at the turn of the century, circa 1900, by an American painter. And he kind of had a recipe. I am completely blanking on his name, which is driving me crazy. But he was a still life painter, and he came up with this thing about wrapped oranges, and he basically made a career out of it. It's killing me. He started in New York, then went to California. When I was working at Eli Wilner, we framed quite a few of his paintings, and I was just so inspired by this. Aesthetically speaking, you have this jolt of electric orange. And as an artist, I get to play with exactly how much is revealed and literally surrounded in a cocoon of white that I can then add as a compositional element. This may look like I just kind of threw this in that white page, but the paper surrounding the orange has been starched and glued and pinned and everything to kind of get that amazing diagonal right at the very top, which points right up to the upper left-hand corner, which again is how we all start every page. So that's a dramatic compositional element. And then how it pairs with the frame. Again, this is another Dutch-inspired frame. It is both complex and simple, the frame that is, at the same time, which again is an overall pairing unifier with the image, I think. And again, this would look completely different in a white frame.
Oh,
you see the white of the paper with the black frame. I see mostly the orange and a little bit of the white, which is my intent.
Gosh, I love this one. Is the painter's name William McCloskey?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
I'm Googling down here off screen. I did not know that one off the top of my head.
Yeah, he did a whole series, and oranges were very rare, as were bananas, at the turn of the century. So they were wrapped, I guess, as a way to protect them.
Mhm. Thank you. Okay, let's go forward. Fine. Okay, perfect. I think this is these last couple of images of installations are sort of the summation and the kind of grand finale, if you will. When I first saw your work, I saw it as an installation, and I couldn't tear myself away because of the individual images and then the mastery with which you combined the images, the sizes and shapes, the different textures. I mean, I love a good salon style hang in this day and age. You don't always see a lot of that, kind of going back to that minimalist aesthetic. But please tell us about the installation, these many installations you've made of your works for various.
Yeah, I mean, I love salon styles. Again, it's a reference back to the grand expositions in Paris and London, and they would have salon days and varnishing days, and every square inch of the museum or the building would be just occupied, every square inch up to the ceiling. So that is a reference for me to use as a display and a kind of a contemporary tip of the hat to that. How I start with this is just dead center, that piece right above my name on the wall. And then I just kind of loosely go off and try to have a symmetry, but I am not married to that symmetry by any means. In fact, and some salon styles like this, you'd have like a little straggler piece that would be up in the far left corner, or maybe even leaned against on the floor. Excuse me. But yeah, this is one of my textbook examples of my salon walls. I believe this was like 5 or 6 years ago at the APAD photography show in New York City.
So good. Now that we are seeing this sort of constellation of your works on one wall, I think we can really get a sense of how many different types of prints you make. Obviously color, black and white, but different types of paper, the toning. You do all your own printing. Is that correct?
Sometimes I also work with a master printer, because it's an art form unto itself.
Sure is.
And like you hinted at earlier, I go through hours and hours and days of testing, proofing, if you will, before we get to the final image. And then notes and records are made of that paper paired with a certain image. But even within that, there are variants that occur. I might want to experiment with a different paper one day, or tone it in coffee or tea, or rip it in half and then tape it back together, or anything.
Great. All right, let's take another look at a different installation. Okay, what are we seeing here?
Okay, so these are my trial proofs that we just referenced. Part of the proofing stages of each print. I test different papers, different tonalities, different palettes. And I have boxes and boxes and boxes of these. Every once in a while on my Instagram, I do what I call a trial proof studio sale, where these get offered. And they're just really fun. They're like just little notes to me. This is a visual notebook. And this was a show that I did, and I decided to skip the frame completely this time. And they are just tacked and glued to the wall.
I love seeing the prints as the naked prints themselves, because it really allows us to then, in a way, kind of see all the various pieces that go into the framed works that you do as well. And that, I mean, there's such a beauty in this, but it gets back to the kind of the image on paper quality that,
right.
When you have the margin edges and the paper curling a little bit.
And the ephemeral nature of photography. After all is said and done, it's a fragile little union of inks or silver gelatin molecules on a piece of paper, and those are influenced by the humidity, and they can be broken or damaged or whatever. They can absorb things out of the air.
I think we might have one or two more installation shots. Let's go forward another one. Okay, good. So this lower series, is this also from your city series or something else?
This was something completely different. So like I mentioned, I was trained as an analog photographer, and these are cut up silver gelatin prints, mostly on the borders of my old silver gelatin prints, like a black border or whatever. And I would just be having fun with these, just trying to find them first of all, and see if I could cut them in a way that it made sense to come up with a small series.
So is this sold as one work with?
It was, yeah, it
an
was sold
image?
as a group, yeah.
Do you ever sell, I mean, these all have a sort of unifying theme of the black and white print and the geometric shape, but do you ever have collectors ask you to make a grouping for them and even like lay it
Oh, yes.
out?
Yeah, often. In fact, I work with a lot of designers,
Uh-huh.
which is really fun. They will give me the size of the wall. If it's close by, they allow me to come in and see it in person.
Uh-huh.
And then the fun begins. Sometimes, you know, I could send a client or a collector a questionnaire. What are you into? What are your favorite numbers? Where did you vacation last? You know, all these things help to inform what I'll be creating and what they will eventually be living with.
Mhm. Gosh, I love that very personal approach. Let's go forward one more. Might be getting to the end. This seems to have a bit more of a thematic hold across the images because of these gold and black frames.
Perfect. Yeah, it's exactly what we were just talking about. This is a group commissioned by a single client, and they chose the images. And we also decided that black and gold would be the best unifying element for everything.
Beautiful. And so did you even do this very specific arrangement for them, or is there some play where they could move these around and, you know?
Oh, this is just in my studio. So
This is just in your studio. Okay.
yeah, so these are all the works as they were finished and documented for my own visual archive. And then it was sent to the client who then arranged them as they wanted. This is currently in Boston, so I was not there for the installation part of it.
I mean, to me, one of the great fun things in life, right, is moving one's art around and seeing it in different ways and pairing it in different ways. So I actually really love that you don't have this sort of prescribed installation that has to just be replicated on a wall, but you've given the owner or collector a lot of license to play with.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, like I said, they have to live with it. They have to be happy with it.
I think we may have one more. Let's see. Okay. I mean, this is a nice place, I think, to
Yeah.
end before we take a look at some questions or any comments that have come in for Q&A. Who do we have here?
Okay, so these are my children. That's my daughter, Harper, in the center. And she's 14 now. She was around 10 when this was taken. And the silhouette below it is my son, Beckett. We named them both after authors, Sam Beckett, Harper Lee. And to the right, there is that black Polaroid that we discussed earlier on. And yeah, these were created for a show in Paris a few years ago.
I almost want to think of the Polaroid as your self-portrait or a portrait of you in a way.
Yeah, no, that's good too. Yeah, I never thought of it that way, but absolutely.
Well, Harper looks utterly like kind of 1950s glamorous, and Beckett, you know, I'm fascinated by the kind of 19th century silhouette portraiture.
Exactly, the paper silhouettes. Yeah, yeah.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. I'm just going to look to see if we have anything in the chat to deal with. So I know we're almost at the last minute or two. And before we wrap up, I want to give you an opportunity to tell us where our audience can see your work next. What's your next installation coming up?
Next. Okay, so planning an exhibition in Paris, but I don't have the details yet, so I can't reveal anything about that.
Okay.
Then the very next thing will be, let's see, it's currently in Nantucket at Cavalier Galleries. If anybody wants to find me on Instagram and then send me a DM, I can give them the details. And then there is a show.
Sorry, how long is that up in Nantucket?
I would assume until early September.
Oh, great. Okay. I will be there in July, so I'm going to make sure I check that out.
Wonderful. And I don't know how many pieces will be present. It's not a show. It's just they have some samples of my work there, some examples. And then in October, I will be in High Point, North Carolina for the High Point Market, as they say, which is
I've always wanted to go.
Oh, it's so much fun. So I'll have a wall of my work. And even though that seems months away, my work is so time sensitive. I have to start making for that show like right now.
Yeah, no, I believe it. There's so much that goes into each one of these. For anybody who hasn't seen one of your installations, whether it's been at an APAD or in a gallery, you should know the difference between the installation shots Jefferson showed and the reality of the world is usually there's sold stickers all over them because people see them and go gaga. So my advice is if you like what you see, you should get there early.
Thank you.
And just want to point out, you are one of my favorite artists that I follow on Instagram, not just because I love your work, but because you post frequently and you really give an inside view into what you're working on, what's going on in your studio. So if you want to follow Jefferson, it's Jefferson Hayman on Instagram. I don't know if you use any other platforms, you can certainly.
Instagram is my main one, so thank you.
I had a feeling. Excellent. Well, I'm definitely going to check out your show in Nantucket when I'm there next month.
Thank you.
It's a great place to end, actually, since we began with the ship. The words eluding me. The top of the house. What do you call it?
Weather vane.
The weather vane. Thank
Yes.
you. The Nantucket weather vane is where we started. Oh, this was such a treat. Again,
Thank
I
you.
look at photos and framing in a completely new way since I've been enjoying your work. And
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. It was really wonderful to be a part of this.
so fun. Great. Thanks, Photo London. This was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.